Alright, let's go. Number 10. The Tomb of the Lord of Sipan. In February 1987, a call reached archaeologist Walter Alva from Peruvian police. Looters had been raiding a Moche pyramid complex called Huaca Rajada near the village of Sipan in northern Peru. One of the robbers was already dead, killed in a dispute over the treasure they had pulled from the earth. When Alva arrived, he found gold artifacts of a quality that no one had believed the Moche civilization capable of producing. The Moche, who thrived along the Peruvian coast between 100 and 700 CE, had concealed something extraordinary beneath that pyramid. Alva launched an emergency excavation to salvage what the looters had not yet destroyed. What he uncovered became one of the most significant archaeological finds in the Western Hemisphere. Buried inside the pyramid, untouched by the grave robbers, lay a Moche warrior priest entombed roughly 1,700 years ago. His body rested within a sarcophagus surrounded by gold, silver, copper, and turquoise artifacts that rivaled the burial wealth of any ancient king on earth. A headdress of beaten gold covered his head. Ceremonial weapons lay at his side. Beaded chest armor draped his torso. Ornaments of astonishing craftsmanship surrounded him like offerings to a god. But the Lord of Sipen did not lie alone. Around his sarcophagus, the Moche had arranged a retinue of the dead. A young woman, 2 warriors, a child, a guardian whose feet had been severed before burial, amputated to ensure he could never abandon his post. A dog, 2 llamas. Each had been killed at the time of burial, sacrificed to accompany their ruler into whatever existence the Moche believed awaited him. Their skeletons formed a protective ring around the man they had died to follow. The excavation itself took on a darkness that went beyond archaeology. The looter killed before Alva's arrival was the brother of a man hired to assist the dig. The community around Sipan had survived for generations through subsistence looting, and the formal excavation ignited tensions that flared into violence. Members of the archaeological team reported relentless nightmares. Others fell ill with conditions doctors could not diagnose. Locals believed the pyramid held spirits that punished intrusion. Then the surrounding tombs revealed the true scale of what the Moche had practiced. Multiple burials contained the same arrangement of sacrificed companions, throats cut, bloodletting, ceremonial dismemberment. The artwork on Moche pottery, once considered symbolic, was confirmed as documentary. The Lord of Sipan was not merely a king. He was a priest who held the knife. The hands that wore those gold rings had almost certainly drawn blood. The treasures that filled his tomb were bought with lives, and the bodies that surrounded him were the receipt. Number 9. The Tomb of the Eagle. In 1958, a Scottish farmer named Ronald Simison was clearing stones from a field on the island of South Ronaldsay in the Orkney archipelago when his crowbar punched through into a void. He lowered himself into the gap and found himself standing inside a Neolithic chamber that had been sealed for 5,000 years. Human skulls stared up at him from stacked arrangements. Bones filled the side chambers. And scattered among the human remains were objects that did not belong: talons, beaks, the skulls of enormous birds. The tomb contained the remains of at least 342 individuals. The total bone count reached approximately 16,000, but the skeletons were not intact. They had been taken apart with deliberate precision. Skulls grouped together in one section, long bones stacked elsewhere, smaller fragments collected into distinct piles. The tomb was not a resting place. It was a processing station, a chamber where the dead were dismantled, sorted, and reorganized according to a system whose logic died with the people who created it. The eagle remains made the discovery something more than a burial site. Mixed throughout the human bones were the talons and skulls of at least 14 white-tailed eagles, the largest raptors in the British Isles, with wingspans exceeding 8 feet. These were not accidental inclusions. The eagles had been deposited deliberately, repeatedly, across centuries of use. Some researchers proposed the birds served as totems for the community. Others suggested something far more visceral. The bones may have been cleaned by the eagles themselves before being placed in the tomb. The practice is called sky burial, exposing corpses to scavenging birds until flesh is stripped and only bone remains. It is documented in Tibet, Mongolia, and Central Asia. The Tomb of the Eagle suggests it may have been practiced in Neolithic Scotland 5 millennia ago. The dead would have been laid on platforms or cliff edges where eagles descended to consume the soft tissue. Once the birds finished, the bones were collected and placed in the chamber. The eagles themselves were eventually added to the collection, honored for completing a task the living could not perform alone. Then the human bones revealed something darker. Several skulls showed perimortem trauma, injuries inflicted at or near the time of death. Some individuals had been killed by violence. Others had been struck before entering the tomb. The community was not simply burying its natural dead. At least some of the bodies had arrived through brutal means. Sacrifices, executions, war casualties. The distinction remains unclear. What is certain is that 5,000 years ago on a remote Scottish island, the dead came to the tomb by paths the living chose for them, and the eagles were always waiting. Number 8. The Sunghir children. In 1955, workers excavating clay for a brick factory near the Russian town of Vladimir, roughly 120 miles east of Moscow, unearthed Ice Age bones. Soviet archaeologists arrived and identified an Upper Paleolithic burial site dating back 34,000 years. Over the following decades, multiple graves emerged from the location known as Sunghir. But the discovery in 1969, that was the one that would haunt researchers for the next half-century. 2 children had been buried head-to-head in a single grave, surrounded by wealth that shattered every assumption about Paleolithic society. The boy was approximately 12 or 13. The girl was 9 or 10. Their bodies had been arranged so the crowns of their skulls touched, arms extended at their sides, feet pointing in opposite directions. Between them lay more than 10,000 mammoth ivory beads, each carved by hand. Each bead required roughly 1 hour of skilled labor to produce. 10,000 hours of human effort had been invested in decorating 2 children for burial. Modern reconstructions estimate the beads alone consumed years of communal work, years spent preparing ornaments for individuals who would never use them. The grave goods went further. 2 enormous spears crafted from straightened mammoth tusks lay alongside the children. Mammoth ivory does not naturally straighten. The Paleolithic craftsmen had developed techniques to force it into shape anyway, creating ceremonial weapons too large and too fragile for actual combat. The children also wore caps adorned with carved foxes, ivory pins, animal tooth pendants, and bracelets. Their clothing had been covered with thousands of beads, transforming their small bodies into glittering monuments of wealth that hunter-gatherer societies were never supposed to possess. Then the skeletons told a story that disturbed everyone who studied them. The boy's remains were unremarkable. The girl's were not. Her femurs were severely bowed, curved in a way that would have made walking difficult or impossible. Her bones bore the markers of a developmental disease, possibly skeletal dysplasia, possibly a genetic disorder. She could not have hunted. She could not have gathered effectively. She could not have moved with her group across the seasonal migrations that defined Ice Age survival. She had been physically incapable of contributing in any traditional sense. Yet when she died, her community buried her with wealth that exceeds anything found at comparable Paleolithic sites. Whatever determined the investment, it was not based on what she had personally provided. The girl who could barely walk received the same staggering expenditure of communal resources as the boy beside her. Some researchers propose they were children of high-status individuals, evidence of inherited rank in a society that should not have possessed it. Others suggest darker possibilities. The children may have been ritually significant, selected for burial as part of ceremonies whose purpose has been lost. The simultaneous death of 2 children buried with such precision raises questions that 34,000 years of silence have not answered. Disease could have killed them, so could ritual. The truth remains buried beneath the Russian soil that finally surrendered them to the light. Number 7. The Screaming Mummy of Deir el-Bahri. In 1881, Egyptian authorities raided a concealed tomb cache near Luxor, where ancient priests had gathered royal mummies during periods of political upheaval, hiding pharaohs and queens together to protect them from desecration. Among the preserved bodies of kings and nobles, one corpse stood apart, a woman whose face was frozen in a scream. Her mouth gaped wide. Her hands and feet were bound. Her body had been wrapped not in the fine linen reserved for royalty, but in a sheepskin, a material Egyptian funerary law considered ritually impure. She was catalogued, stored away, and largely ignored for more than a century. When modern researchers finally examined her in the early 2000s, they began to understand why she had been treated so differently from every other body in the royal cache. The sheepskin wrapping was not a mistake. It was a sentence. Egyptian burial tradition regarded sheep as unclean. Wrapping a corpse in sheepskin was a deliberate act of degradation, a punishment that prevented the deceased from properly entering the afterlife. Her bound limbs suggested she had been restrained at the moment of death or immediately after. And the scream suggested something worse than punishment. In 2024, CT scan analysis published by Egyptologist Sahar Salim of Cairo University revealed what had happened in her final moments. The scans showed evidence of catastrophic stress affecting her body's tissues at the time of death. The muscles of her face had contracted into a cadaveric spasm, a rare phenomenon where extreme physical or emotional distress causes muscular rigidity so intense that it preserves the exact position of death through decomposition. She had been screaming when she died. The agony of that moment had been locked into her facial tissue permanently. No embalmer could erase it, or perhaps no embalmer chose to. The most likely cause of death was a heart attack triggered by extreme stress. She had died in torment, her body seized by spasm, her face caught in an expression of pure terror or pain that the people who prepared her body either could not or would not compose into the peaceful repose standard for royal mummification. They did not remove her organs. They did not perform the standard rituals. They wrapped her in impurity, bound her limbs, and placed her in the cache anyway, among kings. She was found in a royal tomb, which suggests she was connected to the pharaonic family. Some researchers have proposed she was Princess Maritamon, a daughter of the pharaoh who may have conspired against the royal household. Others suggest she was a courtier who fell from grace. What is certain is that a woman died in extreme distress, was denied proper burial rites, and was nonetheless preserved alongside the greatest rulers of Egypt as a permanent record of whatever happened in her final hour. Whoever buried her wanted the scream to survive. 3,000 years later, it did. When the cache was opened, the scream was still there, waiting, exactly as they had left it. Number 6. Tollund Man and the Bog Bodies. On May 6, 1950, two brothers named Viggo and Emil Hejgaard were cutting peat for fuel in a bog near the village of Tollund on Denmark's Jutland Peninsula when their spades struck something soft. They cleared the surrounding peat and found themselves staring at the face of a man so perfectly preserved that they called the police immediately, certain they had uncovered a recent murder victim. His eyes were closed. His expression was serene. A leather noose was tightened around his neck. The brothers had no idea the body was 2,400 years old. Tollund Man's preservation defies comprehension. The acidic, oxygen-starved water of the peat bog had arrested his decay at a near-cellular level. His skin had darkened to leather but retained its texture. His hair remained attached. The stubble on his chin was still visible. The wrinkles around his eyes were preserved with such fidelity that researchers could read the expression on his face. He looked as though he had simply closed his eyes in the bog and drifted into sleep. The leather cord around his neck told a different story. Tollund Man had been hanged. His stomach contents revealed a final meal, a porridge of barley, flax, and various seeds eaten roughly 12 to 24 hours before death. The composition was unusual, containing plants that would have been gathered specifically rather than consumed as part of a regular diet. Some researchers interpret the meal as ritualistic, prepared as part of a ceremony that ended with his execution. He had been fed, then killed, then placed in the bog with extraordinary care, his body arranged in the fetal position, his eyes closed, his expression composed by hands that worked on him after the noose had done its work. But Tollund Man was not alone. Across northern Europe, peat bogs have yielded hundreds of preserved bodies spanning the Bronze Age through the Iron Age. Gråbo Man, also found in Denmark, had his throat cut from ear to ear. Lindo Man from England was struck on the head, garroted, and had his throat slit. 3 separate methods of killing applied to one person. The Windover girl from the Netherlands was stabbed near the collarbone and strangled with a woolen band still visible around her neck. Each body shows evidence of ritualized violence that exceeds what would be necessary to simply cause death. The pattern across hundreds of cases is what makes the bog bodies deeply unsettling. The victims tend to be young. Many show signs of physical perfection or unusual features that may have marked them as significant. Several consumed ceremonial final meals. Many were killed through redundant methods, multiple ways of dying applied to a single body, as though the act of killing itself carried symbolic weight far beyond the practical objective. They were placed in bogs deliberately, in locations communities considered sacred. The bogs were liminal spaces, neither land nor water, threshold zones where the boundary between worlds was believed to be thin. Tollund Man's peaceful face is not the expression of a man taken by surprise. It is the face of someone who knew exactly what was coming. Number 5. The Windover Bog People. In 1982, a backhoe operator named Steve Vanderjagt was clearing ground for a housing development near Titusville, Florida, when his machine churned up human bones from a peat-filled pond. He stopped work and called authorities, assuming he had disturbed a crime scene. What followed became one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries in North American history. The pond contained the remains of 168 individuals who had lived and died between 7,000 and 8,000 years ago during the early Archaic period. Their bodies had been placed in the water deliberately by a community of hunter-gatherers practicing a burial ritual with no clear parallel anywhere else on the continent. The preservation conditions at Windover were unlike anything researchers had encountered in North America. The anaerobic, peat-rich water had shielded the dead from decomposition for 8 millennia. Bones survived. Wooden tools survived. Textiles woven from plant fibers survived, including some of the oldest examples of woven fabric ever found in the Western Hemisphere. Then the researchers looked inside the skulls, and everything changed. Brain tissue was still present. Of the 168 individuals recovered, approximately 91 retained preserved brain matter inside their cranial cavities. The tissue had shrunk and chemically altered over thousands of years, but the fundamental structures remained intact. Scientists extracted DNA from the ancient brains, producing what was at the time the oldest preserved human DNA ever recovered in North America. The genetic material opened a window into the population's origins, health, and family relationships across multiple generations represented in the burials. What the analysis revealed unsettled the people studying it. The Windover community had sustained individuals with severe disabilities and chronic illnesses across long lifespans. Skeletons showed healed fractures, advanced arthritis, congenital deformities, and developmental conditions that would have prevented the affected individuals from contributing to subsistence activities. One adolescent had suffered from spina bifida and would have been unable to walk unassisted by modern standards, yet had survived to approximately 15 years of age, indicating years of sustained care from the community. These were not abandoned people. They had been kept alive by collective effort across decades. The most haunting dimension of Windover emerged from the temporal span of the cemetery. The community had buried its dead in this pond for roughly 500 to 1. 0 years, longer than most modern nations have existed. Across that span, generations of hunter-gatherers carried their loved ones to the same shallow water and lowered them beneath the surface. Then the community vanished. Long before Europeans arrived, they disappeared, leaving no descendants, no oral traditions, no surviving culture to explain why they chose this practice or what they believed happened to the dead they submerged. The pond preserved their bodies with stunning fidelity. It did not preserve their reasons. 8,000 years later, we can see what they did. We will never know why. Number 4. The Tarim mummies. In the 1990s, archaeological excavations in the Taklamakan Desert of western China's Xinjiang region uncovered burial sites that ignited a political controversy still burning today. The cemeteries contained mummified bodies dating back as far as 4,000 years, preserved by the desert's extreme aridity to a state of almost photographic clarity. Faces remained intact. Hair retained its original color. Clothing survived in vivid detail. But the bodies themselves should not have been there. The features of the Tarim mummies were European, not East Asian, and the textiles they wore connected them to populations thousands of miles to the west. The most famous of these individuals became known as the Beauty of Zio, recovered from a cemetery in the Lop Nor region. Her body was approximately 3,800 years old. She had pale skin, high cheekbones, a long nose, and red blonde hair preserved in tight braids. Her eyelashes were still visible. Her facial features matched populations associated with ancient Indo-European peoples who lived on the Eurasian steppes, thousands of miles from the Taklamakan Desert. She wore a felt hat adorned with a feather, a woolen cloak, and leather boots. Around her body lay grave goods that included ephedra twigs, plants traditionally associated with shamanic rituals across Central Asia. The textiles deepened the mystery. Some of the bodies were wrapped in or buried with woven plaid fabrics whose patterns closely resembled tartan textiles produced by Bronze Age and Iron Age peoples in Europe. The weaving techniques matched. The dye chemistry matched. The geometric structure matched. The textiles suggested cultural connection, spanning thousands of miles of steppe and desert during a period when such long-distance contact was considered impossible. Then science collided with politics. The Chinese government has consistently maintained that the Tarim Basin and the broader Xinjiang region have been part of Chinese cultural and territorial space since antiquity. The discovery of European-featured mummies wearing tartan, predating the Han presence in the region by thousands of years, complicated this narrative beyond repair. Several of the most significant mummies have been restricted from public display. International research access to the sites has been severely limited. Foreign scholars who published on the genetic and cultural connections between the Tarim mummies and Western Eurasian populations have faced obstacles in obtaining permissions for further work. The most disturbing aspect of the Tarim discovery is what the bodies imply about the prehistoric world. They prove that long-distance migration, cultural exchange, and demographic mixing occurred across distances that conventional models of prehistory considered impossible. 4,000 years ago, populations carrying European genetic markers and wearing tartan textiles were living in the deep interior of Asia, surrounded by some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. They built communities. They raised children. They buried their dead in cemeteries that the desert preserved with terrible precision. Their faces remain visible, staring out from the sand, holding answers to questions about human prehistory that political pressures continue to bury. Number 3. The Shanidar Cave Burials. In 1957, archaeologist Ralph Solke of Columbia University began excavating Shanidar Cave in the Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq. Over the following seasons, his team uncovered the remains of 10 Neanderthal individuals dating between 65,000 and 35,000 years old. The discovery would transform scientific understanding of Neanderthal behavior and demolish every assumption about the cognitive and emotional capacities of an extinct human species. The most famous of the Shanidar individuals became known as Shanidar I, an adult male who had survived multiple catastrophic injuries during his lifetime. A crushing blow to his skull had blinded him in one eye. His right arm had been amputated above the elbow. His leg showed evidence of a healed fracture that would have left him with a permanent, severe limp. He had lived with these injuries for years, possibly decades, before his death. He could not have survived alone. Members of his Neanderthal community had fed him, sheltered him, and protected him long after he ceased to be capable of contributing to the group's survival. Compassion, it turned out, was not invented by modern humans. But it was Shanidar IV that produced the discovery that would haunt paleoanthropology for generations. Soil samples taken from around the body revealed unusual concentrations of pollen from at least 8 different flowering plant species. The distribution suggested the flowers had been deliberately placed with the corpse during burial. The species identified included yarrow, cornflower, ragwort, grape hyacinth, and groundsel, plants known for their medicinal properties across Eurasian traditional medicine. Solke proposed that Shanidar IV had been buried with flowers, possibly selected for their healing or symbolic significance by Neanderthals who mourned his passing. The interpretation transformed Neanderthals from brutish caricatures into beings capable of symbolic thought, ritual behavior, and grief. Critics argued the pollen had been introduced by burrowing rodents or natural processes. Defenders pointed to the specific selection of medicinal species and the deliberate pattern of distribution. The debate continues to this day. The excavation itself took on a darker dimension. The Kurdish workers hired to assist the dig developed persistent anxieties about the cave. Local tradition held that the site was inhabited by spirits, jinn, and several workers reported hearing voices, experiencing nightmares, and sensing unseen presences during the excavation. At least one worker fled the site and refused to return. Solke documented these incidents in his field notes, treating them as cultural phenomena rather than supernatural events, while acknowledging the fears were genuine and unshakable. Then the bones revealed the most disturbing finding of all. Shanidar III had been killed by a deliberate blow. A deep penetrating wound on his 9th rib was consistent with a thrown spear or projectile weapon. The angle and depth suggested it had been inflicted by another hominid, possibly Homo sapiens, possibly another Neanderthal. He survived the initial injury for several weeks before dying from complications. Someone had wounded him in conflict, and his community had carried him back to the cave to spend his final weeks among his own. 50,000 years ago, in a mountain cave in northern Iraq, one intelligent being killed another. The community brought the dying man home. That act of violence is the earliest known evidence of interpersonal conflict between thinking hominids, and the act of care that followed is the earliest known evidence that the violence was mourned. Number 2. The Varna Necropolis. In October 1972, a tractor operator named Rachel Marinov was digging a trench for an electrical cable on the outskirts of Varna, Bulgaria, when his machine tore into metal artifacts. He recognized them as ancient and reported the find. Excavations began the following year and continued for over a decade. The site, now known as the Varna Necropolis, contained 294 graves dating to between 4,600 and 4,200 BCE, roughly 6,500 years old. What those graves revealed forced a complete revision of the timeline for the development of social hierarchy and organized wealth in human history. The burials contained more than 3,000 gold artifacts with a combined weight of approximately 6 kilograms. This was the oldest worked gold ever discovered on Earth, predating the gold of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia by more than 1,000 years. Beads, bracelets, pectoral ornaments, ritual scepters, decorated weapons of staggering craftsmanship. The metallurgical sophistication required to produce these objects implied a level of technical development that conventional models of Neolithic Europe simply did not permit. Someone in prehistoric Bulgaria had been refining and working gold to extraordinary standards thousands of years before such technology was believed to exist in the region. The most famous burial became known as Grave 43. The individual inside was an adult male, approximately 40 to 50 years old at death, buried with more gold than all the other graves at the necropolis combined. Gold ornaments covered his clothing. Gold-handled weapons lay at his side. Ritual objects surrounded him, suggesting he had held religious authority during his lifetime. The wealth concentrated in this single burial exceeded anything previously found from the period. Whoever this man was, he remains the earliest known individual in human history to be buried with such extreme social differentiation. Then the necropolis revealed something stranger than wealth. Among the 294 graves, a significant number contained no human remains at all. These were cenotaphs, symbolic burials filled with grave goods, but lacking the bodies they were meant to honor. Some included clay masks shaped to represent human faces, with gold ornaments positioned where eyes, lips, and ears would have been. The masks lay on the ground in the positions corpses would have occupied, surrounded by the same kinds of offerings deposited in actual burials. The empty graves implied a category of person whose body could not be interred but whose spiritual presence demanded formal burial regardless. Some researchers proposed the cenotaphs commemorated individuals who died far from home, on trade expeditions or in warfare, whose bodies could not be recovered. Others suggested something far more unsettling. The empty graves may have been prepared in advance for people who had not yet died. Several burials at Varna contained evidence of ritual sacrifice. Skeletons bore wounds consistent with deliberate killing. The man in Grave 43, whose wealth signaled the highest social rank in his community, may have attained that position through religious authority that included the power to command death. The gold that filled his tomb was worked by craftsmen whose lives may have ended at his order. And the cenotaphs surrounding his burial may have commemorated those whose bodies were consumed in the rituals that defined his power. Number 1. The tomb of the cursed princess of Ukok. In 1993, Russian archaeologist Natalia Polozmak led an expedition to the Ukok Plateau in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, a region where the borders of Russia, China, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia converge. At an altitude of 8,000 feet, in a landscape considered sacred by the indigenous Altai people, her team excavated a frozen burial chamber sealed for approximately 2,500 years. Inside lay the body of a young woman who would become known around the world as the Siberian Ice Maiden. Her discovery would ignite a cultural and political firestorm that continues to shape Russian archaeology 3 decades later. The Ice Maiden had been buried by the Prehistoric people, a Scythian culture that dominated the Eurasian steppes during the Iron Age. Her tomb had been constructed with meticulous care, timber-lined, filled with grave goods and sealed against time. 6 horses had been sacrificed and buried alongside her. Shortly after her death, water seeped into the chamber and froze permanently, encasing her remains in permafrost that preserved her with breathtaking fidelity. Her skin survived. Her hair survived. Her internal organs survived. And the elaborate tattoos covering her arms and shoulders survived, still sharp, still vivid, still speaking across 2,500 years of silence. The tattoos were extraordinary. Her left shoulder bore the image of a deer with a griffin's beak and antlers ending in flower-like buds. A second creature appeared on her wrist, an animal combining features of multiple species into a single hybrid form. The ink had been applied during her lifetime by puncturing the skin and rubbing soot into the wounds. The artistry was sophisticated. The imagery was symbolically dense. The placement suggested ritual or status significance far beyond mere decoration. She had been a person of consequence, possibly a priestess, possibly a shaman, buried with honors that included the sacrifice of valuable horses and the construction of an elaborate tomb at extreme altitude. Analysis of her body revealed she died at approximately 25 years of age. CT scans conducted years later indicated she had suffered from breast cancer that had metastasized throughout her body. Evidence suggested she had been using cannabis to manage the pain during her final months. Her death had been slow and agonizing. Her community treated her remains with reverence, mummifying her body, dressing her in fine silks, and placing her in a chamber designed to preserve her presence beyond death. Then the discovery became a sustained cultural conflict. The indigenous Altai people, who consider the Ukok Plateau sacred and believe their ancestors remain spiritually present in the landscape, opposed the removal of the Ice Maiden from her tomb. After her remains were transported to Novosibirsk for study, the Altai region suffered a series of disasters, earthquakes, floods, and a plane crash that killed multiple people. Local leaders attributed the catastrophes to the disturbance of the princess's grave and demanded her return. The Russian government resisted initially, but mounting political pressure and continuing unrest produced a compromise. In 2012, the Ice Maiden was returned to the Republic of Altai, where she now resides in a specially constructed mausoleum at the Anakin National Museum. The most disturbing aspect of the Ukok discovery is the persistence of belief across millennia. The Prehistoric people who buried the Ice Maiden vanished from history more than 2,000 years ago, leaving no descendants and no surviving culture beyond the tombs they carved into frozen mountains. Yet the modern Altai people, inheritors of their own complex shamanic traditions, recognize the burial as a sacred space whose violation would produce consequences for the living. The Ice Maiden was a stranger to them across more than 2,000 years of separation, but her tomb belonged to a category of place their belief system understood. When she was removed, the disasters they warned of began. When she was returned, they stopped. The connection between cause and effect remains scientifically unverifiable. The pattern of events does not. She lies now in a sealed chamber in the Republic of Altai. Her tattoos are still visible beneath the glass. Her face is still preserved as it was when the ice first claimed her. The disasters attributed to her removal have faded into local memory, but the precedent her case established continues to shape archaeological practice across the post-Soviet world. And the questions her preservation raises about the relationship between the living and the long dead remain unanswered. Some tombs were sealed for reasons we no longer understand, by people who believed those reasons would outlast civilizations. The Ice Maiden's tomb has been opened twice. It will not be opened again. 12 discoveries, 12 windows into the ways humans have dealt with death across cultures, across continents, across tens of thousands of years. Each one forced us to abandon something we believed about our ancestors, their simplicity, their cruelty, their capacity for tenderness, their relationship with the dead who walked beside them. The earth is full of chambers that have not yet been opened, bodies that have not yet been found, stories that have not yet been told. They are waiting beneath the peat, beneath the salt, beneath the ice, beneath the sand. And they are patient. They have always been patient.